The chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom, their light glinting off crystal glasses and sequined gowns. Gloria Townsend sat at a round table near the edge of the crowd, her posture straight, her silver hair pulled neatly into a bun that spoke of dignity earned over decades. She had presided over hundreds of trials in her lifetime, her gavel once commanding silence in federal courtrooms. Tonight, however, she was a guest in her son's world, and she had been forced to play a different role. Across the room, Gloria Townsend leaned toward a cluster of well-dressed guests. With her diamond earrings catching the light, she let out a tinkling laugh that carried farther than she intended. "She is too senile to know how much money she has," Olivia said, her voice sharp beneath the sugar. The circle of New York's social elite laughed politely, some uncomfortably, others with genuine amusement. One of them even added, "Yesterday she asked if Reagan was still president." The laughter grew louder. Gloria's expression remained calm. She let her gaze linger on the towering floral centerpiece before her as though she were distracted. Beneath the tablecloth, however, her fingers pressed against a small recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. She clicked it on, the softest sound swallowed by the music of the string quartet. The words had been captured. Evidence mattered more than outrage. 30 years in the judicial system had taught her that truth required proof, not emotion. A waiter approached with a bottle of champagne. "More champagne, Mrs. Townsend?" he asked. Olivia's glass was already half empty, yet she nodded with a smile. Gloria shook her head gently. Her eyes, seemingly unfocused, swept the room in silence. She noted who sat with Olivia, who laughed, and who avoided her gaze. Every detail mattered. This was not simply a dinner party. It was the opening act of a case that had already begun. Inside her mind, Gloria heard the echo of her own voice from years past. Court is now in session. Tonight, though the setting was a ballroom, the trial had already started, and the defendants did not yet realize they were standing before the judge. 6 weeks earlier, Gloria Townsend had woken to the sterile white of a hospital room. The memory of tumbling down her townhouse staircase replayed in fragments, her hand slipping from the banister, the sickening crack of bone, the blur of paramedics lifting her from the hardwood floor. Doctors called it an accident, the kind that happened too easily to someone her age. Yet Gloria could not shake the timing. She had mentioned to her son, Daniel, just 1 day earlier that she planned to review the family's charitable foundation documents, records her late husband had treasured. Hours later, she was broken and bedridden. When she was discharged, Daniel insisted she could not live alone. "Mother, it's safer if you stay with us." Olivia nodded eagerly, her hand resting on his arm as if echoing his concern. They moved her into their sprawling Upper East Side mansion, a place that smelled faintly of fresh paint and ambition. A room on the second floor became hers, once a private study, now refitted with a hospital bed, cameras in the corners, and a lock that clicked each night from the outside. At first, Gloria tried to convince herself it was care, not control. Olivia fussed over medication schedules, offering pills with a practiced smile. Nurses rotated through shifts, all hired personally by her daughter-in-law. Visitors were screened, phone calls accidentally disconnected, letters opened before they reached her hands. Even her meals were timed, no more than what a patient should need. For a woman who had commanded courtrooms, the restrictions cut deeper than any broken bone. One evening, she asked about returning home to recover where she felt comfortable. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Olivia. "Your townhouse is too dangerous now," he said firmly. "We'll take care of everything here." The words echoed like a sentence passed down from a bench, final, unyielding. Lying in bed that night, Gloria studied the bars of moonlight slicing through her window. She realized she was not a guest in her son's home. She was an inmate in a polished cage. And as she listened to the faint sound of a key turning in the lock, she promised herself that this confinement would not be the end of her story. It would be the beginning of her case. The days in the Townsend mansion followed a careful rhythm, every moment managed as if Gloria were incapable of deciding for herself. Yet beneath the polished routines, she began to notice cracks. The pills Olivia offered looked slightly different from those her doctor had prescribed. Some made her drowsy, others left her head strangely foggy. Years on the bench had trained her to notice details. She began tucking certain tablets under her tongue, spitting them discreetly into tissues later. Clarity was worth the discomfort. One morning, while Olivia was distracted by a delivery at the door, Gloria spotted a folder left carelessly on the sideboard. Inside were letters between Daniel and Judge Howard Pierce, a longtime acquaintance from the New York legal circuit. The language was coded but clear enough for her trained eye. They spoke of expedited approvals for coastal real estate developments, of ensuring signatures on sensitive documents. Her chest tightened. Pierce was the very judge she had once suspected of questionable dealings. Now he was in correspondence with her own son. Gloria's heart ached as she pieced together the picture: the push for her early retirement 3 years ago, the sudden accident, and now her confinement. It was all connected. She realized with a chill that she was not simply being sheltered, she was being silenced. That evening, Daniel entered her room with the air of a man checking inventory. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked, his tone practiced. Gloria answered softly, masking her thoughts behind a faint smile. "Fine, Daniel, just tired." He seemed satisfied, and that was all she needed. He believed her frailty was real. Later, as she rested against the pillows, Gloria noticed a pair of young eyes watching from the hallway. Emily Townsend, her 16-year-old granddaughter, lingered by the door. Unlike her parents, Emily's gaze held no calculation, only worry. Gloria smiled faintly, and Emily returned it before slipping away. It was a small moment, but enough. Gloria had spent her career dissecting motives, reading juries, and measuring truth. In Emily's glance, she recognized honesty. In Olivia's careful control, she saw manipulation. And in Daniel's polite questions, she saw betrayal. Quietly, she began to prepare, not just as a mother but as a judge, gathering evidence for the most personal case of her life. The mansion was quiet at night, the kind of silence that made every creak of wood sound like an alarm. Gloria lay awake, her hips still aching from the fall, her mind sharper than she dared let anyone believe. The cameras in the corners blinked faintly, and the hallway lights spilled under her locked door. She had mapped the routine: the guard's footsteps every half hour, the nurse's rounds just before midnight, the subtle click of Olivia's heels on the marble floor. Across the garden, a faint glow burned in an upstairs window, Emily's room. Gloria reached for the small vanity mirror she kept tucked beside her bed. Slowly, carefully, she angled it toward the moonlight and began to flash: 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. A signal from summers long ago, when she had taught her granddaughter Morse code as a game at their beach house. She waited, holding her breath, each second stretching endlessly. Then Emily's light flickered: 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Gloria's lips curved into the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in weeks. She was not alone. The next day, during a supervised crossword puzzle session, one of the few activities Olivia permitted, Gloria leaned slightly closer. "Do your parents check your messages?" she whispered. Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "They put controls on my phone, but not on my school tablet," she murmured back. Gloria nodded faintly, her eyes pretending to study the crossword, though her heart pounded with renewed strength. That night, as Olivia locked her in again, Gloria stared out the window. The Morse code signal had bridged the walls of her confinement. It was not just a flicker of light, it was a lifeline. For years, she had told juries that truth had a way of finding its path to the surface. Now she believed it again. Because in the eyes of a 16-year-old girl, she had found her first ally. From that moment on, Gloria understood that survival depended on appearances. If Daniel and Olivia believed she was slipping into confusion, she would let them. Every stumble over a name, every misplaced object, every vacant stare became part of her performance. The more convincing her act, the more careless they would become. At breakfast, Olivia corrected her gently when she called Daniel by his father's name. Gloria lowered her eyes and murmured an apology. In reality, she was cataloging every expression, every exchange like evidence marked for trial. Later that afternoon, she deliberately poured tea onto the tablecloth, feigning embarrassment as Olivia dabbed it up with a triumphant smile. Good, Gloria thought, let her believe. Each night, she wrote down details in a small notebook hidden inside the hollow spine of an old law book on her shelf. Times, dates, overheard conversations, all recorded in a steady hand. She remembered telling young attorneys that cases were built on patterns, not moments. Now she was building her own pattern, brick by brick, in secret. Daniel often visited, his tone clipped with impatience disguised as concern. "Mom, you really should let us manage your accounts. You don't need the stress." Gloria responded with a soft nod, her eyes clouded just enough to satisfy him. Inside, her resolve hardened. Every lie he told her was another thread in the net he was weaving, and another thread she could pull loose. Emily noticed. During their crossword lessons, she caught her grandmother's fleeting flashes of sharp awareness. Gloria would offer a tiny wink before resuming her act, and Emily's lips would twitch with a hidden smile. They both knew the performance was working. Lying awake one evening, Gloria thought of her courtroom years. She had taught jurors to separate fact from deception, to look past the surface. Now she was the one wearing the mask. If her family wanted a confused old woman, she would give them one. But behind the mask, the judge was still present, gathering her case, waiting for the right moment to deliver her verdict. Gloria's quiet performance bought her time, but even the sharpest mind needs allies. The first came unexpectedly. Jack Turner, the family's driver, had a habit of opening the car door with a respectful nod, never looking at her with the pity that others did. One afternoon, as he helped her into the vehicle for a medical appointment, he leaned closer. "You don't remember me, do you, Judge Townsend?" Gloria blinked, feigning confusion. Jack smiled faintly. 10 years ago, Commonwealth v. Turner, you saw I was pressured into falsifying records. You gave me probation instead of prison. That second chance saved me." The memory returned sharply. She had seen the fear in his eyes back then, the desperation of a young man used as a pawn by powerful bankers. Now he stood by her side again, not as a defendant, but as an ally. He slipped a small phone into her lap as he closed the door. "Use this when you need me. No one else will know." Her second ally arrived in the form of Judge Martha Ellis, an old colleague who visited under the pretense of social courtesy. Olivia hovered nearby, pouring tea and asking scripted questions. When Martha casually mentioned her recent health troubles, Olivia excused herself quickly, uncomfortable with the topic. The moment she left, Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "Margaret Holloway sent me your message. Tell me everything." Gloria outlined the forged signatures, the altered medications, the plan to declare her incompetent. Martha listened with the sharp focus of a woman who had heard dozens of conspiracy cases. "We will build a countercase," she promised, "but we must be patient." That night, Gloria shared her secret connection with Emily. The girl's eyes lit up with determination. "Grandma, I'll help too. My parents don't know how much I've noticed." Gloria squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. Emily was too young to carry such burdens, yet here she was, braver than most adults Gloria had known. With Jack watching from the outside, Martha planning from the courts, and Emily as her eyes inside the mansion, Gloria finally felt the scales of justice begin to tip. The isolation that had threatened to suffocate her was breaking. Quietly, steadily, an alliance was forming in the shadows of her gilded prison. The forecast warned of a nor'easter barreling toward New York, with high winds and heavy rain expected to hammer the city. To most, it meant inconvenience. To Gloria, it meant opportunity. She had studied the security system for weeks. Cameras and alarms always faltered when the power cut out, taking nearly 3 minutes to switch over to backup generators. 3 minutes was all she needed. The storm arrived with fury, rain lashed against the tall windows and thunder shook the chandelier above her room. At exactly 9:00 p.m. the lights flickered, then died. The mansion fell into sudden darkness, broken only by the dim red glow of emergency bulbs. Gloria counted the seconds in her head, steady as a clock. 1, 2, 3, right on cue, a scream tore through the staircase. Emily. Gloria's heart pounded, though she knew it was part of their plan. Olivia rushed out of her room, heels clattering against marble, calling for the guard. Emily's voice wailed convincingly as if she had fallen. The hallway emptied. It was time. Gloria slid from her bed, gripping her crutches with practiced strength. Every step sent pain through her healing hip, but adrenaline carried her forward. She crossed to the painting of New York Harbor that hung above her writing desk. With trembling but deliberate fingers, she pressed along the frame until it clicked. The canvas swung open, revealing the safe her late husband had installed decades earlier. The combination lived in her memory, etched deeper than any scar. Slowly, she turned the dial. Left, right, left, the door opened. Inside lay what they had wanted so desperately to hide, Robert Townsend's original will, its ink still crisp, bank statements tracing unauthorized transfers. And most precious of all, handwritten letters from Robert explaining his wishes for the educational foundation they had built together. Proof, truth, justice waiting to be spoken. Gloria pulled out the miniature camera Martha had smuggled to her and began photographing each page, her hands steady as if she were back on the bench reviewing evidence. The storm roared on, masking the faint click of the shutter. 3 minutes passed. She replaced everything exactly as it had been, closed the safe and straightened the painting. When the power surged back and the lights returned, Gloria was sitting calmly in her chair, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The first true strike in her case had been made. The morning after the storm, the mansion buzzed with tension. Olivia scolded Emily for her supposed clumsiness. Daniel barked instructions to staff about checking locks and power lines. Gloria sat quietly, feigning fatigue. Inside her pocket, however, rested the memory card holding every image she had captured the night before. It was the weight of truth, and she carried it like a weapon. Later that day, a new doctor arrived. He introduced himself as Dr. Kenneth Goldstein, a renowned psychiatrist. Daniel made a show of shaking his hand, speaking loudly so everyone could hear. "We need a definitive evaluation of my mother's mental state, doctor. She's been so confused." Olivia added smoothly, "She can't even manage her medication anymore." Gloria lowered her gaze, playing her role, let them believe. But Goldstein was not who Daniel thought. Years earlier, Gloria had served alongside him on a medical ethics committee. He recognized her at once. When Olivia left the room to fetch tea, Gloria's voice dropped, firm and deliberate. "Doctor, you know me, you know what they're doing." Goldstein met her eyes, then gave the smallest of nods. When Olivia returned, he resumed his professional mask. The evaluation lasted nearly an hour. Gloria answered some questions with clarity, others with calculated hesitation. She wanted the record to reflect not confusion but consistency when tested thoroughly. At the end, Goldstein set down his pen. "In my professional opinion, Judge Townsend demonstrates full cognitive capacity. Any claim of incompetence is unfounded." Olivia's mouth fell open, Daniel's jaw tightened. Before they could protest, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the hallway. Federal agents in dark jackets entered, presenting search warrants. Olivia gasped. Daniel demanded answers, but his voice was drowned by the command, "FBI." "Step aside." Agents fanned through the mansion, seizing files, computers, and phones. One agent carried a box of documents straight from Daniel's office safe. Daniel turned to his mother, the color draining from his face. "Mother, what is going on?" Gloria straightened in her chair, her eyes clear and unyielding. "This is no longer your courtroom, Daniel, but make no mistake, you are standing before a judge. Whether here or in federal court, you will address me as Your Honor." The federal courthouse loomed with familiar gravity as Gloria was wheeled into the gallery. It had been years since she sat in those benches, not as judge but as witness and victim. The courtroom was packed, attorneys, reporters, and officials curious about the downfall of Daniel Townsend. Once a rising star in New York's legal world, he now sat at the defense table, shoulders stiff in a tailored suit that suddenly looked too large for him. The prosecutor outlined the case with precision. For at least 3 years, Daniel and Judge Howard Pierce had conspired to manipulate property approvals, funneling money through offshore accounts. The scheme had accelerated after Gloria's injury, when forged signatures and altered medical reports were used to prepare for her legal incapacitation. Olivia's role was smaller, but clear. Medication tampering, isolation, and deception designed to make Gloria appear unfit. Gloria listened without flinching, though her heart clenched at every mention of her son's name. She remembered holding him as a child, reading him stories about honor and fairness. Now those values had been twisted into ambition and greed. The judge presiding over the case, Martha Ellis, gave her a respectful nod from the bench, acknowledging both her past service and present ordeal. When the defense argued that Gloria's confusion had been genuine, the prosecutor introduced Dr. Goldstein's testimony. Calm and methodical, he dismantled their claims, describing Gloria's consistent clarity under thorough testing. Then came the evidence Gloria had risked everything to capture. The photographs of the original will the bank transfers, the audio recordings of Olivia mocking her senility. Each piece tightened the noose around Daniel's defense. Richard Townsend, Gloria's brother, took the stand next. His voice shook as he admitted to supporting Daniel's narrative because of his gambling debts. "I told myself we were protecting her," Richard whispered. "But I knew deep down it was wrong." The courtroom fell silent at his confession. When the judge denied Daniel's request for bail due to risk of tampering, Gloria felt a wave of mixed triumph and grief. She had won the opening battle yet lost the son she once believed in. She sat straighter, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The law was doing its work, but inside her the mother mourned what had been broken beyond repair. Months later, the courtroom was filled again, this time for sentencing. Daniel Townsend had accepted a plea deal after weeks of mounting evidence and pressure. He would serve 7 years in federal prison with parole eligibility after 5, contingent on his full cooperation in exposing the wider corruption network that included Judge Pierce. Olivia, convicted of elder abuse and medication tampering, received a lighter sentence, but lost the glittering social life she had fought so hard to preserve. Her name, once whispered with admiration at Manhattan fundraisers, had become a cautionary tale. Gloria sat in the front row, cane at her side, her posture unbowed. She listened to the proceedings with the same attentiveness she had once given to defendants in her own courtroom. When asked if she wished to speak, she rose slowly. Her voice was clear. "Justice is not vengeance," she said. "It is accountability. My son betrayed the principles I lived my life by, but the law will guide him toward consequence and perhaps redemption." The room held its breath at her composure. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, but Gloria's focus was elsewhere. Emily stood beside her, fingers entwined with hers. The girl had chosen to live with her grandmother permanently, leaving behind the toxic atmosphere of her parents' home. Together, they returned to Gloria's townhouse, restored and warm with life again. The Townsend Educational Foundation, once endangered, was fully revived. Scholarships were already being awarded to underprivileged students. Each acceptance led her a quiet victory for Robert's legacy and for the fight Gloria had endured. The ripple effects spread further. Legislators passed new protections against elder financial exploitation, naming the bill the Townsend Act. Gloria, once the victim of a family conspiracy, now stood as a symbol of resilience and reform. She began mentoring young judges, sharing her story not as tragedy but as testimony. Justice must be vigilant, even within families. On quiet evenings, Gloria would sit in her study, law books stacked neatly, Emily reading nearby. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. Family can betray, she reflected, but truth endures, and justice, though delayed, always finds its way. She looked out at the city skyline, her heart steady. The judge had spoken not from the bench but from her own life, and the verdict would echo long beyond her years.